What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Hollywood Already Did It, your weekly movie podcast for things that have been rebooted, remade, sequelized, and whether or not we need to keep doing this, and we will endlessly, forever, and for always. That's just the nature of the beast. As always, I'm your host, Blake Schultz, and with me is Terrence Tatum.
Hello, everyone.
And this week, we are finally talking about Candyman. One of the most long-awaited sequels, one of the most long-awaited horror movies before the pandemic. I feel like all eyes were on this when things were getting delayed. An incredibly important movie for a number of reasons that we're going to get into, and just how awesome this movie was. Terrence, tell us how awesome Candyman was.
It's a fantastic movie. I sat in the theater for a good 5 minutes after the credits stopped rolling just to kind of like let that film wash over me. It's really good, and it works as a great. I was always afraid that it would take away or not be as good as the original, but I feel like it works as a good 1A to 1B companion piece to the first film. I love that it's a slow descent, just like the first one, where we didn't get into typical today horror tropes. It kind of like took the slow burn that the first one did, and going to the descent. But I love that it became sort of the social commentary as it went along, and as it got there, and it became something more than what I had ever anticipated to becoming. A big problem that I always sort of had with the first Candyman was that, considering the people that put Candyman in the position that he is, I always was a little off as to why he was killing people that looked like him or looked like him when I was like, why is he a boogeyman to Black people? That doesn't make sense to me. It just still doesn't. And now this film has sort of done a course correction for that. And I dug it. I dug how we got there. I loved the way that it handled all of that and became sort of this sad but true story of how people who look like Candyman have gone through this vicious loop cycle throughout history, and these now are sort of a hive mentality where, yes, Daniel Robitaille is the first, but this has not been the first time that this has happened, and it won't be the last. And we're going to do this vicious cycle, and it sort of ends with one of the glorious. I think it might be a little sped up. We'll get into that, but one of the glorious finales that I've seen in a super long time.
Oh, the finale made the movie. That was an extra.
It's the great button.
3-4 points at
Correct.
the end. I mean, it took it from like an 8 to a 10.
Yeah.
That was awesome. But even like from the jump, you're right. I think one of the first Candyman movie obviously had a lot of social commentary. There was a lot happening in that movie, and it was this almost like a horror drama. I've never really felt scared watching Candyman, but I think it's mostly because I'm like, for so long you don't even see Candyman or a death.
Sort of acts like
you're
Jaws
almost
a little
watching
bit.
Yeah, it's like this mystery unfolding in front of you that then explodes. Mm-hmm. And it's great. And so then you get into this one, and it kicks off with such a unique tone. We're playing the Candyman song during the mirror image of every production company's logo, and you're just already caught.
After the first frame, I was like, wait, is this a mistake? And then it happened on the second frame. I was like, oh no, this is purpose, and I get it now. I like it. Well done.
Well, it was in the trailers also, and I think that's why I was like, ooh, we're doing it. We're really like, they just don't fucking care. We're Candymanning everything. And I love, and then we get there, and I had just rewatched Candyman, and it starts with those awesome like helicopter top-down shots of Chicago. Great. And you're like, well, how are they going to top this? How are you going to make this look even cooler? Well, we're just going to make a fog and flip the whole thing upside down, and you're going to see the city from a point of view you've never seen it before, which is great. And we're both from the Midwest. I'm from Chicago, and as soon as they started talking about some of these, like, we're just cutting off communities, like, yeah, Chicago really is super segregated, and that's very segregated, bad.
And the flip, now that you mention it, is even more indicative of how the movies are too, because the first Candyman, bless her heart, Helen is a white woman, so you're seeing this world, you're coming into this world through the eyes of a white woman. This time we're flipping it, and you are looking at it from a different point, where your main point of view is an African-American male.
Yeah, that's also, it's a very, everything kind of gets inverted. And I think through that, we then see Candyman as a more sympathetic killer empathetic killer.
Empathetic, yeah, and probably more so,
It's
yeah.
it's like one of the things that's always bothered me about Freddy Krueger is he's like, no, he's out for revenge because he was murdered. I'm like, but he was murdered for being a pedophile.
Right.
And Candyman sort of is like, he's also getting revenge for being murdered because he was an innocent man.
Right.
And
I
I was like,
liked
yeah,
someone
that
that I
makes a
should
lot
not have.
more sense.
Right. I like someone that I
Like,
should not have liked, and then I died.
and some of those stylistic choices, the like cutout puppeteering for all of
I
these
love those.
old, oh my god, incredible. I've
Yeah.
never seen anything like that before in anything that I can think of. And I'm sure that I have. I'm sure someone's done shadow puppets or animation somewhere, but this is better.
It's a
So I
great way
don't
to do
care about
exposition
those.
without like feeling overly like dumped on. It's like, oh, you're giving me exposition, and this is a wonderful way to tell me the story. Thank you.
So then you get into like the overall tone of this movie and this story. And if you haven't seen it yet, you should, because we're about to ruin
We're
it.
going into it.
And so we come with this artist who's in the middle of, I have to make a show, it has to be curated, and I want to make something like visceral and raw. And he gets inspired by the story of Candyman because they're living in a gentrified part of the city. And we very, very quickly see a conversation unfold about the mostly cons, but like one character is like, well, now we all live in nice places. And I think if you don't
Right.
fully understand what gentrification is and does, it's very easy to be like, but we have Whole
But
Foods
we're
now.
good now, and not thinking about
Like,
all the things and all the people that had to sort of be squashed to get to that point.
yeah, and it's like I've gone through that where every now and then I'm like, well, it's awesome that everybody has a big apartment, but then like I live in the arts district of North Hollywood now, and I'm like, if they build one more super apartment, I won't be able to live here.
Exactly.
And you're
Exactly.
like, damn it. It's like, and it's interesting seeing it through those eyes of like people kind of reaping the benefits of it at first, only to then learn about this legend and then kind of go through the traumatic suffering of the entire community that it cut off. And then
Yeah.
seeing this awesome art that he makes. Whoever they got to make these real art pieces, I was like, I want to buy all
Can
of
I
this
buy
art.
those? Right.
Although I don't know that I can hang some of it in my apartment because I'm very white.
Yeah, I was like, some of the stuff looks amazing, and I like to buy it. But yeah, it's a great shot is when we get a shot of Cabrini Greens being in the middle of all of Chicago that has risen around it since the original.
Oh man, and it's so dumb how even just seeing Chicago, even in a horror movie, like, I miss home.
Yeah.
I bet I would get murdered by Candyman, but I do miss home. That would be fine.
Yeah.
And then we get immediately all of his like weird suffering moments of like subtle racism that Jordan Peele does well when this artist is like, well, you guys just come in here and do this and then make gentrification happen. Well, think about the artist.
Yeah.
Like, oh my god.
It's a little subtle, couple of those subtle jabs. You're like, oh yeah, that's true. He's had to deal with this. It's a crazy story too, because what we get from the first one, especially if you watch them, this is, I sort of mentioned this off mic, this is a film that acts differently to two different groups who may be watching this. For folks who have not ever seen the original, this movie acts one way, and until you get to a certain point of the film, you don't get a big reveal. If you've seen the original and you remember the name Anthony, and you think about the baby and all that stuff, you're like, oh, I know this. That's him. You sort of watching this the same. The film plays differently to two different groups, but I think it still works on both ends, just depending on what side of the spectrum you come from. But I think it's cool that because this movie says that, hey, since that fire that Helen brought Anthony back out of the fire of, no one has ever mentioned Candyman's name again. Like, it's just gone silent. Which is why it's fascinating that the movie kind of just almost like just sprinkles the seed or deposits like, hey, this happened. And it sort of spreads like wildfire. That's what this whole thing is like. We're putting his name back out there, and it just goes from 0 to 1,000 quickly.
It's like the need for fear is the underlying theme, but it's like people, it almost feels like they're saying at the end, like, we're going to keep making the same mistakes unless you're like afraid to do it.
Correct.
Which is like crazy, but it's also like, yeah, probably like most people don't do accountability unless like you put a gun to their head. So like,
Yeah.
sure. But it is, yeah, it plays out very well either way. And one thing that I think almost added to the first that I didn't ever put together was like when these people see Candyman, only they see him.
Mm-hmm.
And it never really connected with me that in these like climaxes of the first movie, everyone just thinks Helen's gone insane
It's
because no
almost
one else can see Candyman but
yeah.
her. And I was like, oh, I never
It's a thing that I
realized
think it's
that.
because it's the way it's shot. It becomes very Nightmare on Elm Street-ish when you think about it. But like the way it's shot back then, you couldn't really do things the way that you can now to sort of completely show that. You have to use false walls and all that stuff, and it's harder to film it. But here, there are a lot of just amazing shots of seeing mirror looking at the reflection of it, and you're like, yes, these people can't see what's actually happening, but in the mirror, Candyman is whooping that ass, and you're like, oh, this is insane. Like using compact mirrors as the shot, it's gorgeous. And the shot of them pulling away from the high rise is one of the greatest things I've ever seen in my entire life.
Oh, it blew my mind. We're just watching her get attacked, but we can't see him, and we're pulling away from the apartment, and then she just gets smeared on the side. I was like, oh my. And they were like, this person should direct the Captain Marvel sequel. And I'm like, what is the connective tissue?
Like, how did you pick her? Okay.
I mean, I'm here for it, but like,
I'm down. But what did you see here that's like Captain Marvel was about to get nuts?
It's like when they were like, we just watched Clown that John Watts produced. We think he should do Spider-Man. I'm like, I have questions.
The same with Chloe Zhao for like Nomadland was great. Eternals?
Like, oh, hold on. Kevin, are you seeing different movies than the rest of us are? I loved all that. Yeah, every death was so like visceral in the movie. Yeah. And yeah, the art critics I think was my favorite next to the like bathroom slaughter. But it's great. And then you get to this ending, which I guess is the one area that I think we're kind of sounds like we're on the same page about. You could have given me at least a little more breath to this laundromat owner.
Yeah.
Because he's like he's giving you all the exposition, but he does it so fast.
It happens so quick, and I catch it, and it's weird because I think people of my ilk or who are African American will get it a lot faster because you're like, oh yeah, I've been there, I know, I get what you're saying. But I think you're explaining this to a general audience or an audience who's not as familiar to this. You might need to just give me a little bit more breath around what you're saying. Just take a time, add 15 to 20 minutes of like, so we can kind of get in that sequence, because it feels like we go from zero, like we collect his girlfriend and then it's just like off to the races with the back.
Yeah. And yeah, we get to the church and the Sweets for the Sweet is up there.
Yes.
And I like this weird, like, oh, I've already called the police. They're going to come and kill him because I've told them that he's the murderer. So he's also like staging this whole thing, but he's also like transforming on his own into Candyman via this bee sting and summoning him. So I was like, well, is Candyman only born from these brutal stories, or was he going to turn into Candyman without this?
Right. Or was he chosen based on legacy? Like, did the Candyman back in the original put a curse on Anthony and say, this is coming to you? No matter what Helen does, this curse is coming to you. Right.
Yeah. Or is this laundromat owner like putting
this on you? Right. Like putting creation of Candyman to you.
And that was kind of my only, to which I also was like, I get that he's being like, these white people are crazy,
right?
It's like we need Candyman. We're back.
Creating a boogeyman
fear
for them.
And I was like, but in theory, people are only going to summon him like twice, and then they're going to get it. It seems like that's what happened after.
That's Helen. That's what I walked away with, and like I get it. Like, okay, so it happens. She has a smirk that is great when she's summoning Candyman, and like then he says the last one, and they let the one cop go because you have to keep the story going along. But in my brain, I'm just like, yeah, I get how in current day and what we're doing in this movie, everybody's sort of testing like, oh, this isn't believable, this isn't unbelievable. But I feel like if you kill one group of racist white cops, that one cop's gonna be like, yo, F this, we are never saying this name again because some shit goes down.
Because also, in every other version, I guess, she's his partner and isn't white. So I was like, is it also just like the white people summon him and die? Or because when he summoned Candyman was like, I'm going to take over your body and kill you.
Right.
And I was like, well, hold on.
Yeah.
The motivations of some of the villains is where I was like, wait a minute.
And it's also not clear because I wasn't sure. And typically, the person who is saying Candyman always finishes it. Was this a cheat in this one? Because she says it 4 times, and then the racist cop says it the 5th time, and he comes. I was like, I feel like the person who starts it always has to say it 5 times.
Yeah, well, because it's supposed to, it like resets it with everyone else. So I was like, well, is it just,
did he just want to kill these racist white people, which is fine?
And these are by no means like bad points. They're just the only things where I'm like, wait a minute, I think I could have used, because the movie is not long.
It's a quick 91 minutes, I think.
90 minutes. So I'm like, we could have added 5 more minutes to really hammer it home, because we get all like the gentrification stuff, which I love because it is ruining everything now.
Yeah.
And I love a horror movie with a strong current theme and a why should we be afraid? And this is very much like, we should be afraid of this system. Like, it isn't even like, and I guess it is still about racism and systemic racism, but I was like, this also even gets into shit that like gentrification affects everybody. And it is kind of this weird, like, you guys should be afraid of this cycle because we're just going to push the poor people over here. Then the artists are going to move in. The younger people are going to move in.
Yep.
And then they're going to stick around long enough that someone's going to be like, put some cool stuff there. And then we're going to pop it up. And then we're just going to push everybody out.
Make it expensive enough you can't be in there anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, it's so interesting that we're using this like cycle of urban legends and myths to then kind of counter this cycle of capitalism, I guess.
Yeah.
And it goes back to a lot of like when you analyze horror of like, well, what are we afraid of? And it has since Night of the Living Dead, because I'm seeing all of these like, Candyman got woke, and I'm like, shut the fuck up.
Horror has always been political. Like,
horror's been woke since George A. Romero shot that poor man at the end of Night of the Living Dead.
Right.
Like, we've been doing this for so long.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm not even going to deal with that beyond bringing that up. But it's interesting when you look at like decades of horror, and we talk a lot about like, well, why are we remaking or why are we rebooting? And there are, I think, a litany of reasons to be doing this one. And part of it is going back and going, why does horror work and when does it work? And you look at a lot of 90s, like technophobia was big when we were afraid of the Matrix. You look at old racist horror movies like Night of the Living Dead. It's like, well, we're afraid of old thinking, and we kept doing that. We're afraid of consumerism. We're afraid of all of these other ethereal themes that come in. Even like things like Halloween get into just like, we're afraid of something, and then later we're afraid of that trauma coming back. And Candyman takes that and amplifies it in a way that I don't even think the Halloween 2018 movie did, where you really are like, oh, we're taking stuff that's been happening forever and putting it in front of your face and being like, you should be afraid of this.
Right.
And to make you afraid of it, we're going to make Candyman again.
We're going to put a boogeyman in front of you that makes you aware of why this is a problem. Yeah.
But I do think it's interesting because I like Candyman, he doesn't kill you, and then as you die, it is like, this is because of Trader Joe's. So I was like, I don't know that they're gonna like quite connect it.
Well, yeah, and I think again, that's why like it's great to see him in the final image, but it's like, when he's like, tell my story, tell him all about me. I'm like, yeah, but after one story, I feel like they're gonna be like, nah.
There was a slaughter in a high school that we're not really talking about. Like, that was that scene, which was awesome. I was like, man, you could have lifted this out of the movie, though.
I was sitting there the whole time saying that exact same thing. Like, otherwise, they posit the scene at the beginning when she's at the art gallery, but that scene does nothing for the story. Like, you could have lifted that out and put in more story of what he was doing as far as the establishment.
I think it's supposed to directly answer the question when she's like, well, who would even do this? Right. And it cuts to kids. And it did kind of, and white kids, because the black girl was being teased in the bathroom, and I think the one girl who left was Asian. She's like, "Nah, I'm good." Yep, I'm out. But that one also kind of messed up the name ones, because the bald girl says it and like skips away and then comes back. Yeah, and I was like, oh, she needs to die first now. And I thought at her fourth Candyman, she was gonna like pop, and they were all gonna be like, "Whoa!"
Yeah.
And I was like, because that's how you do it. Then those kids go tell other kids.
Right.
but it did make me remember. I was like, yeah, when I was a kid, everybody was like, you gonna say Bloody Mary 3
You gonna
times
do
in the
it?
mirror?
Right.
And it's like, I say to my mom, I was like, I'm not really religious anymore, but I'm not so not religious that I would like do that. If you
Right.
brought to me, if you were like, this is a witch's totem and we found it under your apartment, I'd be like, well, we have to move.
Well,
it's
we are gone now.
it's that simple. If
Yeah.
something charges at $6.66, I buy some gum. Like,
It,
I'm
it,
fucking around
it's
with
always
that.
interesting. It was always interesting to me because I mean they have it in this movie happen where his sister does it and she dies immediately, but it becomes a joke sort of in the present day where he's like, yeah, black people got enough shit going on that we don't do this shit, this cursing shit. I'm like, that's kind of true. Like we don't. There's enough crazy shit happening in our life that trying to summon some curse just seems like a bad idea. So
But I
that's
mean, all these
why
deaths
it
are
was.
so brutal.
That's why I think that shot of the kids in the high school is there, and that's why they have the black girl in the toilet. But it is one of those ones when it was all said and done. It's like that scene could have literally just been cut and lifted out, and you could have added something else to sort of.
Unless you're trying to imply like she's now going to hear about Candyman and go, "Oh, I saw it,"
And I do think that the girl who ran out would obviously she would spread the story because she'd be like, "Yo, we were doing it. I got out of there. They kept going. They did."
Right. Like, it is also like, look, it keeps happening. It is also still another like even the younger like the Gen Z is not going to save you. They're also doing it. No offense to any Gen Zers who are listening, but like, yeah, the brutality of all these deaths, even the first two people who died, I was like, oh my God.
It's brutal. Well, it's crazy because that first one comes in because the first 20 minutes of this, there's really no, it's all just story beats. And we're kind of just like doing a slow beat. And we don't really have any deaths up until that point. Like it's atmospheric horror that we're sort of have up to that point. And then that happens. You're like, oh, we showing it. We going in. Got it. Okay. I'm here.
Yeah, that was, she's like latched onto his belt. And I was like, oh my God. This is so crazy.
Yeah.
And then it was even crazy watching him watch it and kind of be like, yeah, I don't care. And I was like, oh, are you already Candyman?
Right. I was like, you
like,
already in that point? Yeah, it was weird. And also, I mean, there's a whole story of like parents protecting their kids. Like, I'm protecting you by not telling you the story, but I also not giving you the entire truth. And we go to the scene where the mom's like, yeah, I was just trying to keep everything quiet, keep you safe, and keep this like, do I look safe? Do you see my face? Do you see my arm?
yeah,
I'm not good.
You get into the generational trauma where it's like we're trying to end it, but like, what would have been the better choice?
I
Telling
made
you
him
or
need to
not
know.
telling you?
Right. I made him need to
Also,
know
like,
so I don't.
Do you think maybe you should have just moved entirely out of Chicago?
Maybe the state
instead
just
of like
isn't
down
for
the
us.
street. I get it, but I loved it. It was like one of the top movies of the year,
for
without
sure.
a doubt. But the other reason we're talking about like why we need it is the statistic you just brought up. That's like Nia DaCosta is now the highest grossing
opener for
black woman director opening.
Which is just
and
it sounds like a stat that doesn't make sense, but then you look at the other ones. Was Ava DuVernay for Wrinkle in Time, the young lady who did Little, and one of the women who did Queen and Slim. So it's like all stuff that's within the last 6 to 7 years. So it's like, oh yeah, it's starting to get there now, but we've never had a black female director open a number one, which is kudos. Like about time.
It's also, we often talk about black stories that aren't just about trauma, and I was like, well, we don't have a lot of horror movies that aren't like a white dude in a mask.
Yeah.
So I'm like, good, this is all, we got to bring this back.
And I love two things. Well, one thing, I want to make sure that everybody, I know people keep saying Jordan Peele, and Jordan Peele is a producer. He's not the director. So let's make sure that we're giving the credit to the person that's supposed to be curating correctly. It's Nia DaCosta.
He signed a check,
right?
Sat down at a test screening and gave some notes.
Correct.
I like the man. He works hard, but this is Nia DaCosta's ride.
But what I am really excited about for her, one, getting this credit, this stat, but two, she is now getting to direct a film where she is not directing the African American film. She's being hired to do a job where it's most of the cast is white except for the woman playing Kamala Khan. So you're kind of just like, see, we can just hire them to do a job, and it doesn't always have to be the black person telling the black stories or the Asian person telling the Asian stories.
Terrence, that's a really good point. But I would like her to make another Candyman.
I would
because
too.
this was very good.
I
Like, no,
would
you're
too.
right. You're right. These are all good points. But can I have another Candyman?
Can I do this again?
Well, she could direct thousands of things.
That's true. Just come back to this eventually.
It doesn't have to be tomorrow.
No, take your time.
Because I like it was so refreshing, even getting a horror movie that isn't just like jump scary. I was like, oh, this is tense
It
and
feels different.
ethereal.
It feels different than a lot of the other horror movies that we've sort of become accustomed to over the last decade. This feels like a film that doesn't belong in the horror genre of stuff that we've gotten in the last decade, truthfully. That's why I think it stands out a little bit more to me too. Because Candyman didn't at that time feel like those slasher films of that.
No,
that
it was
era.
more akin to like a Silence of the Lambs drama, slow burn type thing.
Right.
And we need that from time to time. It can't all be Conjurings and Michael Myers.
Yeah.
Despite what they want you to think.
The trailers in front of this show me that is what we're going to get in October. They're going to like, yeah, we're going to stab you to death.
We're going to do that. We're going to remake Train to Busan. We're going to...
We're in it.
Why would we try anything new or risky or interesting?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't care. But do we need to remake Train to Busan? The answer is not really.
Not really.
The only pro to it I can think of, and I just tweeted this to somebody, and I was like, we also didn't need to remake The Ring, which is one of my favorite horror movies. But I didn't know that was a remake when I was like 12 when that came out. And then I found
Did you go back to watch the original
one? Of course.
Yeah.
And then I discovered a litany of foreign horror movies, and it brought. So I was like, so I guess maybe this might do that for some
people towards the original, which gets them down the rabbit hole of enjoying that type of film. Yeah, it's possible.
So I was like,
that definitely
I guess.
Happened with that. Yeah, that definitely happened with the Japanese horror. So I hope that can be the one beacon of goodness that comes out of that. But I know that may come out of it as an afterthought, but that is not what anybody who was making or marketing that film or creating that film.
No, of course not. Nobody was like, let's remake Train to Busan so that these young kids discover foreign horror movies. That's no.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find a silver lining.
Yeah, I get it.
I'm trying to find the good deal at Trader Joe's to justify the pool of the apartment.
Makes sense. I get it.
It's not working. The rent is too high. Candyman was right.
Yaya, by the way, we didn't really talk about Yaya. He was phenomenal in this, and I just wanted to make sure that because I didn't mention that on my YouTube thing, and I felt bad. Yaya is really good, and
it's incredible.
Yeah, and this becomes sort of gets into some body horror stuff towards the back end, but like it is, you feel everything that's happening in the moment when he's sort of mute, and that tear comes down, and it's like, oh, this guy can't even say anything, and it is heartbreaking to me because I've dealt with people with this or mental illness, and in that moment when she's holding him, she's like, we're going to get you help, and it feels like for a moment that she is dealing with a person who's mentally ill or sick, and those cops just come in and shoot without asking any type of question. It's like, oh fuck, all of this hits different because of the world that we're in. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, that's a big part of it. I also, what always gets me in those moments is when I'm like, it just didn't need to be like this.
No, like there were other options.
It didn't need to be this other, like the villain of the movie, who is this laundromat owner to me, and the cops, of course. But I was like, he didn't need to call them.
No,
he didn't need to cut off his arm and shove that hook in there. Like he doesn't want to become Candyman. Like he's. And I'm like, well, and it's also that thing where I'm like, they all told you not to say it, man.
Because
you could have just gone back to your mom.
It's the weird thing about the curiosity kills the cat. It definitely did in this moment, because he was saying, like, he dug in a little bit and he got into it, and he was like telling people, like telling the reporter, like the critic, say his name, and then once he found out how deep he got into it, he's like, don't say his name. He's breaking mirrors. He's shouting like, no, we're out of this. But for him,
well, yeah,
Spain had already left the station. It was too late. Yeah.
And his partner is going to do it, is what he's like, no. And I'm like, okay, there he's figured it out. Like, this is, you've brought something back
that you can't contain.
Some people that hopefully is going to do some good somewhere, but maybe. But yeah, when they come in and just shoot him, and then she's in that car, and he's like, look, this could go down a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, we gotta get Candyman in
Right. I was like,
here.
call him now. Summon him immediately.
And even when like they look at each other through the window, and you're like, it's so. That's always like the worst and best part of horror movies is when I'm like, it didn't have to go down like this.
It becomes like almost a Beauty and the Beast or Phantom of the Opera, where it's like this, like this. They clearly love each other, but now they can never be because this all got mucked up in the system, which is it's just sad.
All because you just had to go and figure it out. But I mean, if we get more, like I want more. I am now like, great, I don't know. Does this wipe out 2 and 3? Is this like a requel the way Halloween is, or is
I
like
feel like it
somewhere
does. I feel like it does remove those because the reason why I think it does is because it is, granted, I think the other one takes place in New Orleans. One of them takes place in like Louisiana or something like that. But the thought of no one in Chicago mentioning that name doesn't come up at all. I feel like if that name was used in any type of death, even if it was just a mention, it would have gotten brought up in some type of news. The way that they made this film seems that he had been shut down since the fire with Helen.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that means those 2 other ones are wiped out.
That's I mean, it makes sense. They're not great, but I'm also sort of like, we could have just had some shadow puppets to be like, and then in Louisiana this happened, and
there's some visuals, and I like the sort of the setting of Farewell, but there's nothing there. You can remove that.
No, I mean that's how a lot of those horror movies went. Yeah. It did well, 22.3 million at the box office.
20.4
for an R-rated horror movie.
Yeah.
In a pandemic.
Yeah,
without
some R-rated
VOD options,
an R-rated film, horror film, black lead in the pandemic. This is pretty good numbers. I am getting weird though with these box office because one week, like Free Guy does the exact same numbers as the superhero movie, and they're like, Free Guy's a winner, yay! But the week before, you said that exact same number, just slightly lower, was not.
So I'm telling you, man, it's whoever's PR team they have.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, because it really is like I've got them pulled up now just to kind of look, and it is like, Mortal Kombat opened at 23 million, and we were like, I don't know. Yeah. And it's like, then this opens, and we're like, it's the single greatest box office of all time.
Right.
Like, because then like you have things like Spiral at 8 million, and no one was like, this is the end of Saw. They were just like, what can you do?
Yeah.
But then, A Quiet Place 2 blows up.
Mm-hmm.
Conjuring does 24 million. The Hitman Wife's Bodyguard does not, like 11 million.
That's a low number.
F9. Yeah. I'm like, that's another one that I'm like, no one talked about.
No.
Reminiscence made 2 million.
I still haven't watched that.
No one talking about it.
Yeah.
It's not a good movie.
And that's a star. Like Hugh Jackman is a high lead.
Like it did, like 20, it seems like 28 to 35 is now your average, right? Like, but here we are at Candyman making 22.4. Suicide Squad opened to 26.
That was the one that they were like that, but they were
and they're like, "Oh, this is the worst thing ever."
And I'm like, "Wait, what?" And then Free Guy makes about the same amount, and they're like, "Free Guy is the IP return, like new IP is great." I'm like, "Wait, what?"
Every HBO Max Warner Brothers one is getting this like, oh man. And I'm like, is somebody at HBO just like say it's not doing great so we bump up our HBO numbers? Because then whenever these Disney ones, Free Guy, Black Widow, it's like, we're back.
Yeah.
We're back. And now with Candyman, they're like, this is really good. And I'm like, it is really good. But like, it's not A Quiet Place 2 good. Like,
right. Yeah.
Like it's right on par with like The Conjuring 3, which we were like, well, if that can't.
People were like, Conjuring didn't do it. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm like, make up your mind, Hollywood.
I don't know what the litmus is anymore. They're all over the place. Yeah.
Like, everything. It's like you just want to be in like 20 to 30, and you're fine.
And you're good.
You're not gonna make but who knows? This also, I don't know what the budget for this was either, and I'm sure it wasn't that much.
I'm sure it wasn't that much for this.
25 million.
Yeah, 25 million. They're already at that with just the box with what they have so far. So I'd imagine anything from this point is going to be in the goal. They'd want to get like to times 2.5. This plus whatever they like, the word of mouth is good for this. Like the critics are
Yeah,
good, the fans seem to dig it. So I think this might, Shang-Chi's a different audience, but I think this will have legs. And eventually when it comes on whatever VOD service
I think
it'll do
that'll,
well.
because it's interesting. Once Shang-Chi is out, now that Venom's delayed, however long it's delayed for, September is dead.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
like Candyman and Shang-Chi could just hang out till
Could be there
October.
until the Halloween stuff for October. Yeah. And Candyman sort
Candyman
of
could
has the
easily,
bridge because it could,
yeah, it
yeah,
could easily become this weird movie that's just in theaters until next year,
right.
which would be
Which would
awesome.
be great.
Because yeah, it's like, and then once you get to October, it's weird, it's
We're
crazy.
in it.
It's just
Yeah.
every week,
Yeah.
and then we're kind of dead again. But no, I loved it. I'm very excited to see what Nia DaCosta does next, which we know
Yeah.
is
The Marvels.
Marvels, the
Yeah.
Marvels, with all of them,
Everybody.
everyone,
Everybody.
Captain Marvel, Miss Marvel. I don't think we've given a name to LeBeau's character.
Yeah, I don't know which she in the comics she uses multiple code names. I don't know which one
Yeah,
we're giving her. But yeah, she's there as well. It's a very eclectic cast. I was like, yeah,
it's
you
going to
got
be great.
a Neapolitan, if you will.
Yeah, I think it's going to be great. Well, that was the show, guys. We will see you next week for Shang-Chi. You can, of course, leave us a review and let us know what you thought on our YouTube comments. Terrence does all of our other YouTube reactions and reviews on the YouTube channel. We also do another show called Marvel Pair Up, where we take the Disney Plus Marvel shows along with whatever genre and give you the history of that, be it Marvel movies themselves, buddy cop movies, or sitcoms. I'm at, as always, Blake, and Terrence is at Terrence Tatum, and that is our show.
Later.